Welcome to The Scoop, NANP's monthly educational webinar series. I'm your host, Andrea Granson. These live webinars are recorded and everyone who registered will receive a link to the recording. NANP members can earn 1 continuing education credit for participating in Scoop webinars by taking the corresponding quiz, which can be found in the membership area of the NANP website. Today's webinar will conclude with a Q&A session, so feel free to type in your questions as we go along so that we can get to as many as possible at the end. Okay, let's get started. So Mira Dessy is the ingredient guru, a holistic nutrition professional, author, and a popular public speaker. She knows that it's not just what you eat, but what's in what you eat. Mira has been working with clients for over 12 years. She mentors clinical clients to help them grow their practice so they can be more successful and less stressed about the work that they're doing and love. Mira is a member of the National Association of Nutrition Professionals, the Society for Nutrition, Education and Behavior, and the American Association of Drugless Practitioners. Additionally, she is on the board of directors for the American Holistic Health Association, is a member of the Professional Advisory Board for the Turner Syndrome Society, and is a founding member of the Holistic Business and Wellness Alliance. She can be found online at ingredientguru.com. Welcome, Mira, and thank you for joining us today.
Thank you, Andrea. I am delighted to be here.
Excellent. Yeah, we're looking forward to this.
Yeah. So I'd like to just dive right in.
Go ahead. Yeah.
Start by sharing. As I said, I am the founder of the Ingredient Guru. I am an ambassador for both Transformation Enzyme Corporation and Perk and Eliza Act Biotechnologies. I am also on the board of directors for the American Holistic Health Association and am a medical advisory board member for the Turner Syndrome Society of the United States. So those are my disclaimers. And today we're going to be talking about ingredients and inflammation. These ingredients that appear in our food frequently don't get a lot of attention or enough notice from our clients, many of whom don't realize the impact that they can have on our gut and how much they impact digestive wellness. So my goal today is to help you gain a deeper understanding of that so that you will be better able to support your clients moving forward. We're going to start by talking about food and labeling. Then we will be discussing inflammatory ingredients and the scientific literature behind that, and we'll conclude with resources and then a Q&A. I always like to start with this quote by Brillat Savarin, "Tell me what you eat and I will tell you what you are." Unfortunately, for many of our clients, we find that they are consuming more and more preservatives and more chemicals in their food. And so when we do this, they're left not truly understanding the label. And when we try to educate them about that, one of the things that we find is that most clients feel that a calorie is a calorie is a calorie, which of course we know is not true, simply because there is a broad range of nutrient density across our food. Many of them also don't truly understand the impact that their nutrition can have on their health, and some of that comes down to the culture that we live in that does not place a good premium on nutritional support for health conditions. And very few of them read the label or think about their food choices. You know, the average consumer tends to pretty much shop on autopilot. They know where things are in the grocery store, they know what they like, and that's what they buy. They don't stop to think about it. If they do read the label, chances are they're primarily looking at just a few key facts, such as the calories and then potentially fats or salt, if that's something that they've been advised about. So what we wind up with is too many people who are counting their calories and not enough people who are truly looking at the chemicals that are in their food, because the part of the nutrition label that they're looking at is the nutrition facts, instead of going down below and taking the time to look at the ingredients and to truly understand what those ingredients are. So it's not really just what we eat. I mean, this is my tagline. It's not what we eat, it's what's in what we eat. And that ingredient panel is a huge key to health for many of our clients. And for them to learn to read the label is a huge shift in developing a more conscious relationship with their food. But by helping them gain that expertise and that habit as practitioners, we're actually helping them take a deeper, more foundational approach to their wellness, because they're getting truly beyond just the upper level of what they're eating, but they're looking at the impact of how that food is created or what's in it that could be affecting their specific health and wellness issues. This particular study is from 2014, and one of the things that they found was that those food patterns that have been given the identifier of a Western diet, we tend to refer to it as a SAD, or Standard American Diet, which is high fat, high cholesterol, high protein, high sugar, high salt. All of these things contribute to obesity, metabolic syndrome, and cardiovascular disease. Part of the challenge with this as well is this has now grown beyond our borders, if you will, because of the advent of global food company acquisition. The Western diet has expanded to virtually every country around the world. And so other cultures are beginning to see the negative health incursions of these movements. And unfortunately, many of them are very attracted to our fast food and our other food choices, our highly processed food choices. And so their formerly healthy cultures are also beginning to see these health issues appearing in their cultures as well. So when we're looking at our nutrition and how we're eating, one of the things we have to remember is to be looking at our microbiome, because that is, at its very basic level, the key to how well we are able to process our nutrients and be able to then support the body. So the few things that we know about the microbiome: it is impacted by birth circumstances. Obviously, whether you have a vaginal or cesarean birth is going to be an enormous influence. There is now talk of swabbing the vaginal canal and applying that to the mouth and nose of babies that are born through cesarean section. Some countries actually will take a cesarean baby and place it between the mother's legs immediately after birth for a few minutes to hopefully allow some of that microbiome to influence them as they're breathing. But that microbiome, that initial inoculation, is very important. And then how we support that microbiome moving forward is also important. Our microbiome is also impacted by our dietary choices. We have learned that all foods are not equal, in spite of what modern food producers would have us believe, and that the foods that we eat can impact our microbiome negatively as well as positively. Unfortunately, the Standard American Diet tends to be loaded with options that are very much directed towards those negative, culture suppressing ingredients, and we'll be talking about those in a little bit. One of the biggest challenges that we see is that there are currently only a limited number of studies that look at the effects of food additives. And part of the challenge with this is because running these studies does take money. It takes financial resources as well as scientific curiosity and impact, and food producers are certainly not interested in studying the impact of these ingredients, because this is how they create a product that is going to be shelf stable, that is going to be fully emulsified, that's not going to separate, all the things that they need in order to be able to sell their product. So they don't have an interest in doing that. For other organizations that perhaps do have an interest in doing that, they are perhaps not as financially equipped to be able to run large-scale double-blind, scientifically controlled studies, because those things are very expensive. They do take time. And so the literature that we do have in some ways needs to almost be amplified, because we are taking what we know to be true by talking to our clients, by taking case histories, by doing work with them, and then applying it to the small amount of research that we do have. So 1.6 million Americans currently struggle with some form of irritable bowel disease, and that is everything from IBS all the way up to Crohn's disease. 70,000 new cases are diagnosed in the United States each year. And as of the last reporting by the Crohn's and Colitis Foundation, there are 80,000 children in the United States who have been diagnosed with irritable bowel disorders. Part of the challenge with this is that instead of looking at the food and the impact that our dietary choices can be having on these maturing guts as the children are growing, the pharmaceutical industry instead is creating new pharmaceutical interventions and suggesting medication. And I am positing that a better approach, of course, is to start with the food, to look at dietary choices, to look at what's in what we're eating, so that we can help these children and these families, the adults also, to eat in a way that supports better gut function so that they do not need to rely on medications. One of the most important things that comes into play when we are looking at the concept of how these ingredients are added to our food is the category that has been denoted as generally recognized as safe. Unfortunately, this is what is frequently called on as the reason why these ingredients are safe to consume. So I'd like to take just a moment to go over that with you. This is the GRAS notification. The last update was in January of 2006, and I believe it's due for another update soon. But essentially, GRAS came about because the federal government admitted that it no longer had the resources through the Food and Drug Administration to be able to examine all of the different additives that were being included in our food. They were being created so quickly, and there were so many different applications that it was not possible from both a manpower and budgetary standpoint for the government to be able to evaluate everything. And what they did was to turn it back over to the food producers. And one of the areas where I find this to be a bit of a struggle is that for a substance to be known as GRAS, the scientific data and information must be widely known, and there must be a consensus among qualified experts. So the corporations that are using these ingredients, in some cases creating them, but in other cases simply using them in their food products, they're the ones who are hiring the experts. And one of the challenges that we know is that when you are paying for a study, frequently the source of funding does lend weight to the results that you get. So having corporations paying scientists to find an answer about an ingredient that they want is kind of like putting the fox in charge of the hen house. So it's not unbiased, and you may not be getting all sides of the equation. There are a couple of other questions that come into play with the denomination of GRAS. One is, how much is safe? Well, the safety levels are obviously supposed to be set through the studies, through the science that they're performing. And who determines the safety levels? Well, as we discussed, that is up to the companies and the scientific research teams that they have hired in order to do that. But one of the challenges that we have is the only guidance that the FDA gives is to either allow it or to potentially note that you may have to put some sort of a color additive listing on it. So in 2015, there were 46 new food additives that were added to the allowable supply. The FDA had no questions about those. 10 of them, the notifier, in other words, either the producer or the manufacturer that wanted to use that particular additive, asked the FDA to stop evaluating the request. And 7, they did require a color additive use listing. In all the years that I have been looking at this, I have never once seen something where the FDA has refused a GRAS notification. So they're looking at it simply saying, yes, it looks okay. It looks like what you said was fine. And so that obviously in and of itself presents a problem because they are taking what is being presented to them at face value. Now, one of the other challenges about how much is safe is that no one is keeping track of how much the consumers are eating. So if 4 parts per million is okay, and a company puts 3 parts per million in their product, but then you're eating another product that has the exact same amount, 3 parts per million, all of a sudden you've just had 6 parts per million, and it can accumulate throughout the day. So you can see how our clients can potentially be over consuming these ingredients. And it's worse for children because their body mass is so much lower, and the amounts that are generally identified are identified according to adult parameters. So children are getting a much higher dose of many of these ingredients, and it's having a much more significant impact on them. Trans fats is a perfect example of how the GRAS notification can go awry. So we start with the fact that they are a known source of systemic inflammation. And when we have trans fats in our diet, there are now studies that indicate that it may actually hinder the production of dopamine and serotonin. They are listed as hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated ingredients. It's important to note that mono and diglycerides are also a form of trans fat. In 2014, after years of having trans fats in the diet, the FDA finally decided that trans fats were no longer safe. So they were removed from the GRAS listing. However, as I mentioned, when they were first introduced, they were given this GRAS notification. They were generally marketed as safe, and people have been consuming them for a very, very long time. We now know that as little as 2 grams of trans fat consumption can impact cardiovascular health as well, because of its inflammatory effect. I use this particular label frequently with clients to help them understand why it's so important to read the label. So this is an example of something that I call funny math. For this particular product, when we look at the label, it says that there are no trans fats on the label. And this is the nutrition panel, which is where most people look. As I mentioned before, we frequently do not tend to have a lot of people looking down below this label at the ingredient panel. But when we do look at the ingredient panel, we see that this particular product has its second ingredient is olestra. And olestra is also a form of trans fat. I don't know how many of you remember olestra at its heyday. It was marketed as a fat that was going to be the healthy fat to end all fats, because you could eat fat, you could consume fat and not get fat because your body would not absorb it. And it came to, we came to find out that there was an issue with the use of olestra, because people began to have what was politely termed anal leakage. I've heard other people refer to it as leaky butt. So we're consuming this fat that, because our body can't absorb it, is disrupting our digestive function. It also interfered with the absorption of fat-soluble vitamins, because obviously if we cannot absorb the fat, then those vitamins cannot be activated. And lest you think that Olestra is no longer in use, I'm here to assure you that it is. The challenge is previously it was in big letters on the front of the package using something called front of package labeling, where it would say made with Olestra, because that was supposed to be a very attractive thing. Now it's in small letters on the back on the ingredient panel, because food producers know that a lot of consumers, the majority of consumers in fact, still don't read the label. So the Olestra is there, and one of the biggest challenges is we now have a new product, which is esterified propoxylated glycerol, sometimes referred to as EPG. So it's a non-absorbable fat substitute. It was originally developed in the 1990s. It will be hydrogenated if necessary. So we're taking something that is essentially a trans fat and then hydrogenating it, which makes it definitively a trans fat. So in November of 2015, the FDA had no questions about this particular ingredient. However, studies showed that it was also having the same issues as Olestra, occasional separation of the test material from stool bulk. So in other words, we're still going to have that quote unquote anal leakage. And one of the things that most horrified me about this particular ingredient is this statement at the bottom: if the safety of EPG is generally recognized by qualified experts, it would exempt EPGs from the definition of a food additive and therefore from pre-market approval requirements. So that means that it wouldn't have to go through certain FDA requirements. It would simply be allowed to be added directly to the food. So again, that comes back to the entire concept of generally recognized by qualified experts. We, once again, have companies, in this case, the company that has created this particular product, saying, we're doing the science, we're taking care of it for you, it's totally fine, and the FDA has no objections. So when we look at the next level of this, we now have the intended use of the particular for this ingredient, and it was supposed to be a fat replacer up to 38% by weight, which is an enormous amount. And it was also going to potentially appear in baked goods, baking mixes, frozen dairy, grain products, pasta, gravy, sauces, nuts, nut products, and soft candies. So you can see that it covers quite a wide range of products at the grocery store that could potentially have EPG in it. In April of 2016, the FDA's letter was pending. And then in September of 2016, it was approved with no questions. This is essentially an updated version of Olestra. And this is one of the other challenges that we tend to face when working with clients. Unfortunately, there is in our human nature this desire to have all of the benefits and all of the delight of eating things that are fatty tasting or sweet without any of the caloric impact. We think we should be able to eat our cake and have it too. And unfortunately, for these fats, we already know that it is not healthy for us, that we are not going to be able to have good biological impact. And yet food producers are going to continue to try to create ingredients like this. And part of the reason for that is they are simply responding to market demand. They know that this is something that consumers want. And that makes some of the work that we do with our clients very important in terms of teaching them about the benefits of healthy fat, about the benefits of whole food products, and about learning to avoid the marketing and advertising and the allure of products that are supposed to somehow magically make it so that you're not going to bear the responsibility for what you eat. Sweeteners is another category where we frequently struggle because of how they impact our system. Artificial sweeteners have been shown that they have a significant impact on the gut microbiota. And part of the challenge is that in addition to impacting the gut microbiota, we also have a significant uptick in glucose intolerance because of the alterations that are made to the gut bacteria simply by consuming these artificial sweeteners. And so again, we want to be able to have that sweet taste without having the caloric impact of it. And we think that somehow by choosing artificial sweeteners instead, we're not going to see that impact. But what many consumers don't realize is the downstream effect of what they're doing to their gut by making choices to have these artificial sweeteners in their diet. One of the other things that we see there are a number of studies, fortunately, on the impact of a number of ingredients on insulin resistance, metabolic resistance, diabetes, etc., simply because that is a huge healthcare crisis right now. But unfortunately, the challenge is many of these studies, while they're there, do not tend to get a lot of airtime, if you will. There are not a lot of consumers who are aware of these because food producers don't want these studies to come to light. Instead, they'd rather have things like there was a study at one point that came out that said that if you drank Diet Coke, it was better for you than water for losing weight. And that is a true study. Not a good one, but it is true that that happened. That's the one that got mainstream news. Looking at low-calorie sweeteners and the fact that they're linked to insulin resistance doesn't get a lot of airtime. Sugar alcohol is another aspect of artificial or non-nutritive sweeteners. It's a category of its own. It does have some calories, but it tends to have less calories. The challenge is that it still has a significant impact on the gut. However, because it has a lower glycemic impact, it tends to be very attractive to consumers. And xylitol and erythritol are the two big ones right now that seem to be getting a lot of attention. However, these are chemically altered carbohydrates, and they are going to have a significant impact on the gut. For any of you who have clients who struggle with diabetes or blood sugar regulation issues who may be coming to you having consumed a lot of quote unquote diabetic sweets, frequently those people come to you with significant diarrhea issues, and part of that is because they are over consuming many of these sugar alcohols. The body cannot bind with those and function properly, and so we can have gas, bloating, distension, or diarrhea. Fructose is another item that we struggle with, and some of it is high fructose corn syrup, certainly, but there are other forms of fructose that are used in food as well. Agave nectar tends to be a big darling of the ingredient world right now because it's perceived by consumers as being a quote-unquote natural fructose sweetener that is low glycemic. And so it's got a sweet taste, it's low glycemic, and it feels like a natural product because supposedly it comes from the agave plant. However, unfortunately, the way that we are processing agave nectar at this point is not the way that the native ancestors processed it. And so it is a totally different product. And where high fructose corn syrup is approximately 55% fructose by volume, agave nectar is 70% fructose by volume. So in addition to looking at the inflammatory impact that it is having on the system, we also know that we are overloading the liver and creating a challenge for processing the fructose from the agave nectar. The other place where we tend to see fructose in the ingredient cycle in terms of how it's packaged into foods is from a very sneakily named crystalline fructose. And I'm hugely opposed to that name, not that I can change it, But part of the challenge with it is that it's very benign sounding. So crystalline, crystals, fructose, fruit sugar, and that's the way most people perceive it. So they think that it's a relatively benign ingredient. What they don't realize is that in essence, crystalline fructose is dehydrated high fructose corn syrup. As such, it has a fructose value of approximately 90% fructose by volume. So you can see how that would be very overwhelming and inflammatory for the system. Crystalline fructose tends to be found in a lot of places where consumers don't even ask to read the label. One of the most common tends to be those serve your own yogurt bars, because you serve yourself by the ounce, and then you go over to the candy bar, load up on top, and then weigh it, and that's how you pay. Most people don't ask to see the ingredients that are in the yogurt in those places, and crystalline fructose tends to be the sweetener of choice there. It's also found sometimes in certain drinks or certain other formulations where they want a big sugar hit without having to use something like high fructose corn syrup, especially since so many consumers are now against that. And when we look at the number of ways that these other high fructose sweeteners can be added to the diet, we can see how you can have several hits throughout the day, which is creating an impact on the liver and also creating a high inflammatory response. So again, it comes down to educating our clients that they need to always ask for the label, always look at the label, and understand what they're looking at. Gums and starches is another area where we tend to have high inflammatory impact on the system. They are often used as a thickening agent. They are also hugely prevalent for gluten replacement. There is an enormous category of gluten-free products. However, because gluten and glutenin tend to bind things together, they have that sticky quality, it needs to be replaced with something. So food producers tend to turn to the food gums in order to recreate that impact and that mouthfeel. Many food gums are high in fiber, and as such, it can cause bloating, gas, or diarrhea. One of the other things that tends to happen is because it's fiber, but because of the way it's processed, once it gets into the system, it pulls liquid from the system into the bowel in order to try to bulk up that fiber. And there are, in some cases, very rare, but it has happened, bowel obstruction from overconsumption of food gums. It's found in an enormous amount of foods. Virtually every single aisle of the grocery store, including, by the way, the pharmaceutical aisle, has carrageenan in it. It can be used in medications. And again, this comes down to looking at the impact that we see with foods where a certain amount can be safe, but how much are you eating as you move throughout a day? What is the impact of all of these gums in your diet? So these are a number of different gums that tend to be used in food. The most common ones at the moment tend to be xanthan gum, guar gum, and gellan gum. One of the places that I find these gums appearing more and more regularly is in dairy products and also in alternative dairy. And part of the reason for that is because dairy is potentially not being cultured the way it was before. And so in order to thicken it faster, they add the gums in order to help with that process. If you encourage your clients, for example, to make homemade almond milk at home by simply soaking almonds and then rinsing and grinding and straining them, the most common comment is that it's thinner than the almond milk that they buy at the grocery store. Well, that's because they're not adding the gums when they're making this product at home. And the challenge is overconsumption of these gums has a negative impact, as I said, but in addition to that, we're also being exposed in so many different ways that unless you're truly looking at the label, you don't necessarily realize it. So, one of the biggest ones that we see as a food gum that we tend to run into is Terragum is a new gum that is definitely gaining more and more traction, especially in the frozen confection section. And the biggest challenge that I find with this is there have been absolutely no tests whatsoever for human consumption and safety. It was simply identified as a plant gum and it was put into production. Now, at one point, there was an outcry against Breyers, who unilaterally added this to all of their frozen dairy confections. And Breyers' response was to say that this addition allowed them to ensure the ice cream's quality and to prevent it from having a gritty or a grainy texture. So the other thing that they did mention, but that didn't get a lot of airplay, if you will, was that it resulted in greater chances for temperature abuse. And so the way ice cream is handled and processed. And so the Terragum allowed that to not happen. And that means that your frozen goods are potentially semi-thawed and then refrozen. It can't go beyond a certain amount and still pass rules and regulations, which is fine, but it doesn't separate as much if that happens anymore because of the Terragum binding it together. And I just don't think that's a good reason to add a product that has no current studies for human safety for consumption. And then the biggest one that's getting a lot of airplay right now is carrageenan. Carrageenan is found in so many products, it's absolutely ridiculous. And part of the challenge is there are studies showing a significant link to gastrointestinal inflammation. There are also studies showing a higher rates of colon cancer in lab animals. And unfortunately, because so many people are beginning to object to the use of carrageenan, manufacturers have found a very sneaky way around that and will sometimes list it as sea vegetable extract. They're not lying, they're just obscuring the source. Up until November 2016, the National Organic Standard Board allowed it for use in organic products. It has been removed. As of last year, it should have completely cycled out. They do give companies a period of time from which to remove certain things from process or formulation, because it does take companies a while to be able to reformulate a product and then to also rework their packaging, et cetera. So they generally give anywhere from 12 to 24 months for that process. So as of November of 2018, it should not appear on any organic product anymore. Now, one of the things that I wanted to show you, simply because it is really mind-boggling to think about, is all of the different brands at the grocery store that can use carrageenan in their products. And this is simply companies. This is not their products. So each of the companies on this list has one or more products that have carrageenan in it. And I will tell you that this is not the complete list. I could have put more on the list, but the problem is it was starting to get so small, it was getting hard to read. So these are the top companies that I was able to find where they had one or more product. And as you can see, there is an enormous cross-section of types of food that are included in here. And many of these are also private label. And as you may or may not know, private label tend to be grocery brands or store brands that are manufactured by another company, but then that the store where you're buying it has their label on it. It's not always easy to find out who is manufacturing for other people. And that's why I chose to include the store brands as well, so that hopefully your consumers will be more willing to read the label, even if they're shopping at, say, a Kroger or Target or somewhere else, to know that just because those are private labeled brands does not mean that they are safe from this kind of manipulation to have a highly inflammatory ingredient in their products. And I'd also like to share a small story from one of my clients. She had significant gut health issues, and we managed to clean up her diet and get her to where she was feeling better, having good bowel health and doing well. And then at a certain point, this was after about 6 months, she began to not feel well again and started having more bloating, more gas, more diarrhea, and couldn't figure out what was going on. And after a couple of weeks, I suggested that we go back to reading all of the labels to see if there was something going on, because she claimed she hadn't changed anything that she was eating. She had found a diet that worked for her and she was sticking with it. And it turned out that one product that she had been eating had recently been reformulated and now had carrageenan in it. And so she removed that, and within 4 or 5 days, her gut cleared up and she wasn't having those problems anymore. So just because you've identified a clean product doesn't mean it stays that way, especially in this day and age of corporate mergers and acquisitions. It's important to encourage your clients to, on a regular basis, and I generally recommend every 3 to 4 months, to just start reading labels again, make sure everything's still the same. And if things are fine and then gut health changes, or there are other symptoms showing up that are not consistent with the health goals that you've achieved, to go back to basics and to start reading the label again and see where things might have been modified. So the last gum type ingredient that we look at is modified food starch. And so this isn't really a gum, but I include it in that category because it's the most convenient place to put it. It tends to be primarily from corn. And so obviously if that's happening, that means that it's a genetically modified product, since unless it says organic modified food starch, which truthfully I have not yet seen on the label. So if you see one, let me know. But usually it just says modified food starch, and corn being one of the most highly genetically modified products, we know that it's GMO. While it can also come from wheat, potato, or tapioca, those tend to be much less common. It is a calorically very, very dense ingredient, and that's because the grain or the root has been broken down to its most easily absorbable function, and so the body is able to simply convert it and break it down very, very quickly. Gluten contamination tends to be high with this ingredient, and although it is a stabilizer or a thickening agent, again, we have the issues going along with gut absorption of fluid and inflammation because of that. It does tend to be treated with either sulfuric acid or chlorine. So if you have clients who are chemically sensitive, modified food starch can be a significant issue for them. And it's also, regardless of which source it comes from, typically blended approximately 10% with maltodextrin, which again is a sweetener that comes from corn and is genetically modified. So again, not a great ingredient. So other ingredients that we tend to see are dietary emulsifiers, and these have the effect of not only modifying the microbiota, but promoting colitis-like inflammation, and have also been observed to create metabolic syndrome. And unfortunately, emulsifiers tend to be more and more prevalent in the food. And again, it's about stability of the product and convenience for the producer. Instead of having to culture fully, or instead of having to make sure that it's properly blended, they can add an emulsifier, run it through a huge speed blender, and pull it all together, and then put it out on the shelf or in the product, and it won't separate. Monosodium glutamate is another ingredient, and I know many of you already talk about monosodium glutamate for its neuroaffective issues, but it does also have a significant impact on liver inflammation and has been linked with liver disease similar to non-alcoholic fatty liver disease or non-alcoholic steatohepatosis. Ingredients where you can find MSG tend to be things that say glutamate, but hydrolyzed proteins, yeast extracts, autolyzed yeast, those kinds of things can be a form of MSG. And it's important to note, however, that glutamic acid from unadulterated protein is not linked to the health problems. So if it's unadulterated gelatin, then it's not an issue, because frequently you'll find people calling you going, does that mean I can't have gelatin anymore? It depends on what form your gelatin is and how healthy that source is in terms of whether it's adulterated or not, as to how much it opens up the glutamic acid, the glutamates. It can also come from fermented proteins, by the way. Potassium benzoate is another preservative that is significantly linked to intestinal issues and can contribute to inflammatory pain. And so we always encourage, again, it's simply reading the label. Like, that is the most powerful 3 words that you can give your clients when they are on their health journey in terms of taking back control of their diet. Read the label. It's where you're going to find the vast majority of your information, and then learn to understand what's on that label so that you can make choices that best reflect your health goals. Hormones are another issue, and we have a challenge because, we had this situation that went on a number of years ago where farmers started to say that their milk was made without RBGH, recombinant bovine growth hormone. And the major dairy producers were very upset about that because they didn't want their product to be perceived as less healthy or less beneficial. So there was a lawsuit, and both sides won and both sides lost. So the dairy producers won because the major dairy producers won because they were able to force the smaller producers to put, this milk is from cows not treated with RBST, and that the Food and Drug Administration has determined there's no significant difference. The small producers lost because they had to say there is no significant difference. Unfortunately, now, a couple decades later, we do know that there is a significant difference indeed, because IGF-1, insulin growth factor 1, is a potential risk factor for not only gastrointestinal cancers, but breast cancer as well. And so when we have cows that are treated with added hormone, we are increasing the risk for cancer, including of the gastrointestinal tract. Antibiotics are an enormous impact on our food, and more antibiotics are actually prescribed in this country for animal husbandry usage than for human beings. Unfortunately, it not only leads to antibiotic-resistant disease, it also has created a major impact when it comes to food poisoning, because we are finding it harder and harder to support people who come down with food poisoning because of how those antibiotics are being delivered in a low-level manner across the animal husbandry industry. And so that means that people are being exposed to low doses all the time. The only way to avoid this is to get either organic, to buy direct from a farmer who you know is not using it, or to at least buy natural, natural chicken, natural beef. Not my favorite, but if you can't afford organic, the natural label is at least better, because these antibiotics are not allowed for use in animal products that have that natural label on it. Ingredient sensitivity is huge, And as we consume more and more of these ingredients, because they are appearing with higher frequency in our food, it can be very, very important to consider testing our clients to see what kinds of things they're sensitive to. This is an ingredient panel from one of the companies that I use to test for this sort of thing. If I'm testing for food intolerance issues, for delayed hypersensitivity, I do also throw in an ingredient panel because I think that's a very important thing to do. It allows us to see if they are not only having health issues from it, but if it's adding to that gut permeability. So if food products were honestly labeled, it would be a whole lot easier. Unfortunately, they're not, because it's not a great choice for the manufacturers. And so they will continually manipulate, as we saw with the carrageenan, to call it sea vegetable extract, or to use front of package labeling or other methods to try to convince our clients that the way they're formulating these products is safe for consumption and it's not an issue. So we really need to educate them and support them. Client education is the biggest thing that you can do in terms of helping them make better, healthier choices in their home and at the grocery store. I'm a huge proponent of teaching label reading classes, of doing an in-home pantry makeover or grocery tours or cooking classes. I find that those are a really wonderful foundational way to support the work that you're doing and help your clients truly learn and absorb this information. So one of my resources that I offer is I did write a book called The Pantry Principle: How to Read the Label and Understand What's Really in Your Food. And in the book, we have, each chapter is essentially a standalone chapter, but they do all tie together. This is a great resource for your clients to be able to study and learn more about their food and to begin to make that process. You know, unfortunately, it's such a challenging and broad issue that it's not like you can encourage them to throw out everything in their pantry, go to the grocery store one time and boom, boom, they're done and they've got a perfect pantry from there forward. It's a step-by-step process, a little bit at a time, as they learn and change and grow with your support and guidance as they go through learning about the different things that are important to them, important to their family, how to make those healthy changes. So it needs to be a step-by-step thing, and having a book like this can be a great resource for you. So there are a couple of things that I would like to share with you. One is that if you're interested in the book, you can email me at mira@theingredientguru.com. I do offer practitioner discounts on the book. The other is I have a Facebook group called The Pantry Party. It is free to practitioners. All you have to do is go there on Facebook and sign up to ask to be joined in. And we are a large and growing group of nutrition practitioners who support each other, who share resources, information, education, support. And so I'd love to have you join us over there. And if you have any questions about any of this, I certainly would love to encourage you to reach out to me and see how I can help support you incorporating some of this into your practice and to be able to share with your clients so that they can have their healthiest, best, most nourishing life.
Thank you, Mira. That was fantastic. And so I just have a couple questions here. If somebody's asking, can they get the slides or at least the article names?
Yes, we can make that. We can, well, so don't you do the recording? Can they get the slides that way, or do they want the individual slides?
So yeah, with your permission, when I send out the recording, I can attach the slides if you're okay with that.
Yeah.
But I just wanted to, okay, so we can do that. And then Shannon's saying that she's found an organic coconut milk. It's canned. It doesn't contain the guar gum. It's the Native Forest brand. The ingredients state that it's organic coconut milk with just filtered water. Can she trust the can for being honest?
Yes. So Native Forest actually happens to be my favorite brand of coconut milk, in part because it's only 2 ingredients and in part because they are one of the few brands that does not use BPA on the lining. They have an enameled lining.
Excellent. That's good to know. And then you mentioned a particular food, an ingredient testing panel. Can you share the company or who you use to run that panel?
Yes. So I use ELISA ACT Biotechnologies to run that. And that particular test is their lymphocyte response assay, LRA. So that's the company that I use, and that's a test. If you'd like, Andrea, I can email you contact information for the company if you want to share that.
Yes, because then I can add that to the email that's going to go out for everyone who's registered and the slides.
Okay.
Okay. No, that's good, because I think, yeah, many of us have access to food intolerance testing, but then when you said you go one step further and you're specifically testing for ingredients, I think that's probably something that many of us will like to have access to, because obviously that's the next step. No, this was fantastic. So I don't see any more questions, so we will conclude. Thank you, everybody. Next month, our guest will be Melanie Polk. She is from US Enzymes, and she is discussing the critical role of enzymes, not just for digestion. See what can happen when used systemically. So please mark your calendars. That's going to take place on Thursday, May 9th. So please plan on joining us for that presentation, and thanks everybody for being with us on the call, and have a great rest of your day.
Thanks, folks.
Thank you, Mira. Thank
Bye.
you. Brilliant. Thank you.